one of the things, that I found so shocking when I take a look at some of our data is that in 2019, 85% of executives went to sleep at night with the view that digital was a nice to have. Whoa. 2020.
That's a lot.
Yeah. 2020, digital was the only way globally that businesses were able to do business. So, wow, 85% of these executives were in for a big shock in 2020 when digital was the path forward through the pandemic. Certainly we know what came next was, if I can get my slide to go. There we go. This new normal where digital was the response to the pandemic. Digital was the way forward, and organizations that weren't digital were in for a world of hurt, and a lot of them needed to pivot very quickly. And that's one of the things that we saw certainly in the market.
So you said earlier 2020 was digital only, and I think we all have a fair share of experience with that. But when you talk about the new normal, how much, Nick, do you think digital first is going to stay with us?
Oh yeah, great question, and it's definitely so. We've been in this sort of new normal for so long that it's our data is showing us that when the pandemic eventually resolves, and when we should be going back to normal, there's going to be this hybrid approach, or there are going to be these habits that hold over from the pandemic into sort of this new normal. All of a sudden, we're not going to go, flocking back to brick and mortar stores. We might still do buy online, pick up in store, or delivery services. We may expect that digital experience to be the normal experience versus more of the exception.
Yeah, I was at the bank the other day for the first time in a year. It was like a field trip. I was really happy, actually. So maybe we'll have a quick pendulum where everybody is excited to go brick and mortar, and then we'll have to deal with it for the next decade.
Yeah. So our data is telling us that coronavirus is going to be here in one way, shape, or form for the next decade. And it's going to shape how we live, we work, we connect, we consume content. It's going to be something that we continue to live with. And it's going to be shaping our experiences, our digital experiences. And, here's the call to brands out there, the urgency maybe that you need. If you haven't started that shift, if 2020 didn't force you to, or maybe you sort of started off and you said, well, we're gonna shift a little bit, but everything's gonna snap back when the pandemic ends. Well, here's the message to you to say, well, it's time to reevaluate that, or it's time to double down. It's time to focus on digital. And we know that 80% of CMOs have observed that their customers have placed increased value on digital experiences during the pandemic. So it's this focus on digital experiences, make those experiences easy, effective, create that emotional connection with your B2C consumer, your B2B buyer, and digital is the conduit, digital is the channel through which you're going to be able to do that. One of the things that we know based off of our Forrester data, and for those of you who aren't familiar, every year we do a customer experience index. This is basically how we quantify customer experience. And this graphic is looking at the US customer experience index. We do this on a global basis in many different markets. And one of the shocking things that I've seen as I've begun working more and more with this data and incorporating it into a lot of my content, a lot of my presentations, is that now for 3 years running, actually 4 years running, if you take a look back to the 2017 data, for 4 years running, 0% of companies have created an excellent customer experience. Now, this is both shocking and also sort of good for you watching, because you know that the excellent that race isn't over. That race to get to excellent customer experiences hasn't been won. But at the same time, this sort of abysmal look at, how companies have kind of ended up in this sort of murky middle around customer experiences hopefully drives you to kind of go back and say, how can we create better customer experiences? Well, it starts with digital experience. And one of the things that we know through the pandemic, when this pandemic kicked off very early on, we did some data gathering, and we found that companies were doubling down on digital customer experience in the early days of the pandemic. It was second only to remote workforce support. So, not surprisingly, companies were looking, how can they arm their employees to work remotely? But number two was, how can we up-level our digital customer service? And it was, through those digital channels that they see as so important.
So what I really love about the Customer Experience Index is, and I'm not sure if our listeners are aware of that, is that you actually managed to tie a dollar value to the improvement of another point in the customer experience, which I wish more, and actually per vertical even. So automobile means that much additional revenue. Yep. Financial services, that much additional revenue. And it's such a great tool to make the business case internally for why improving from okay, which is very misleading because it's not okay to be in this okay bracket, right? To good or even excellent, how much additional yield that means. Really encourage everybody to look at that if you're a Forrester customer.
Yeah, and I went ahead a little bit too quickly, but just sort of highlighting the yes, you're absolutely right. We've looked at the sort of the revenue that gets driven by just a 1 point increase in customer experience score, and depending on the industry, it's anywhere from about $100 million to $1 billion that companies can drive by enhancing their customer experience index by just 1 point. So there's bottom line revenue growth for enhancing a customer experience. And we know that digital is at the top of the list when it comes to improving these experiences. So just last year, as part of our as part of one of our surveys, we asked companies, what are the key actions your firm is taking to achieve your objective of improving the experience of your customers? And the vast majority of them are saying, we want to improve our online customer experiences because we know that that is going to be tied to improving the experience of our customer. And we don't have the time to go through all of these, but I wanted to share all of this data to sort of put this in context and help you understand, where are your peers placing their bets? And, we see, very clearly improving online customer experiences and improving the value of our customer engagements from a brand perspective are two of the key priorities that brands are seeing going forward.
Can you help us interpret the top and the bottom of this? So I find it curious that 40% would say improving online customer experience is crucial. My understanding is that demands an omni-channel, cross-channel customer experience, yet we find improving that and creating the architecture to deliver it at the very bottom. How can we understand the responses here better?
Yeah, this is a very curious point, isn't it? Because we think that we think that the architecture, the technical architecture, is linked to the actual outcomes around customer experience. And what this survey is telling us is that there's a perception, either in reality or frankly just perceived, that that's not the case, that you could in fact improve your online customer experiences without re-engineering your architecture. And it may be the case that some organizations have done that architecture piece already, and they're now focused on some of the more strategic or tactical pieces there. We're sort of not able to kind of go behind the scenes on this data, but that's sort of two ways to interpret it. One is that there's a perception and a reality, and two is that some of these brands have done some of that legwork around the architecture piece, and they're sort of now focused on, now that we've got the behind the scenes taken care of, how do we expose some of those experiences to the customers, to the end users?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let's talk more about that architecture, what that needs to look like.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Examples first.
Yeah, we've got some really good examples, and I wanted to kind of bring this alive a little bit around what are we seeing from a brand perspective of companies investing in digital, investing in their architecture, and investing really in this, omni-channel experience. So, for example, you see Nike, and think of this as Nike is one of those brands that we like to focus on, but think of this as a proxy for, any of those or many of those athletic brands that you do business with, where you're trying to tie apparel to an experience, and you're starting to digitize that. Certainly people who buy, Nike shoes and Nike clothes are, probably fit into an athletic or, a lifestyle along those lines. They're maybe runners, they're maybe doing other activities. So how can you tie that entire brand affinity into a digital experience? And Nike, for example, is building out capabilities across wearables and other channels to enable that experience. So that's just one example in the retail space. I love this Domino's example because, for lack of a better word, pizza and food in general could be a pretty commoditized space. I know that I'm opening up a sort of potentially big argument of your favorite pizza brand, but Domino's is looking at a way of breaking out of that idea of commoditization through enabling effectively an entire delivery ecosystem. So, if you're not familiar with this, US-based pizza brand, they've gone through a huge digital transformation. And now, for example, you can order a pizza through a voice assistant. You can get a text message or an app alert when your pizza's literally getting put into the oven. And it will tell you when you need to leave to get to that store, or, if it's on its way to get delivered to you. When you get to the actual store, you can check in on a kiosk. It has your name up on the screen. It says, when your pizza is going to be done. So it's doing more than just sort of taking, baking a pizza pie. It's weaving together this entire ecosystem through the lens of a customer. So I think that this is, really, really a great example of digital experience and digital transformation, and a, traditionally offline brand, really sort of digitizing its efforts.
And what I love about the example is when you've ordered the pizza, waiting for it, that's like usually the worst part, right? And these guys, they're actually all over Europe too. And
Sure.
They've made the waiting fun and so engaging. It's
Sure.
A really interesting part of their journey that they focused on there.
Yeah, it's just this, rather than, call into the pizza shop and say, I want a pizza, and then like, when is it going to turn up? Sort of exactly, you've got this immediacy around when that's going to arrive. Talk about immediacy. one of the big pain points when we all used to travel, when we all used to be flying places, is my bag going to make it? So much so that, many of us have basically not checked bags in a really long time, because we're sort of unsure of whether or not it's going to make it. Well, Delta, as a way to stand out from, what we see as digital sameness. So, you can book a flight anywhere in the world. Chances are that airline is going to have a mobile app for you to check in and have your boarding pass and those sorts of things. So that sort of digital sameness, those brands aren't able to break out of that because everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone's got a mobile app. Well, Delta is going one step further and plugging in a lot of its back-end systems so that customers can start to get additional data around their trip. And one here you see is the fact that you get notified when your bag is loaded onto a plane, or when your bag is loaded off of a plane, and what carousel it's going to arrive at. And one of the things that this does is it makes the journey easier. It creates sort of emotional relief from a lot of flyers that my bag isn't going to make it, or it hasn't made it, or is it on the plane, or is it not? So Delta has gone kind of one step further here around the journey and started to digitize something that was, typically one of the things that was more behind the scenes for them. So that's one of the things that we see here with Delta. So I know that there's a lot here, and we've sort of talked about how digital can be differentiating for a business. But as we start to look at CMS, content management systems, and digital experience, one of the things that actually one of my colleagues coined a number of years ago was that content is the soul of digital experience. So we think you should start there. And if you look at this over here on the right-hand side, there's a lot going on here. And this is more of a takeaway for all of you here today who are trying to sort of build out your digital experience roadmap. But if you take a look at those blue pieces are the foundational pieces. And if you look at the one that's all the way at the beginning, we see implement a new content management system, a new CMS, because that is what is going to power a lot of those other things that are going to be coming out in phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4. And then based off of the color coding, you see things aligned with marketing or business. And then some of the capabilities in the light green over on the right-hand side that those power. So, by implementing that new CMS and extending the platform with content analytics and using that CMS to power a mobile app, you're doing things like empowering local practitioners to use global content and assets, personalized experiences based on a dynamic profile, putting those insights dashboards into the practitioner's hands. That is sort of on the right-hand side, you sort of see the expression of all of these things that kind of underpin it on the left-hand side. So again, this isn't meant, we're not going to go through all of this today, just because we don't have the time, but this is sort of a takeaway for you of, how can you sort of draw out your roadmap, and how are you sort of segmenting this into sort of foundational components for marketing, the business, and then what are the capabilities that bubble up for your practitioners, for your business on the right-hand side.
So you call this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And we don't have a time frame attached to, yet you also call the section, the market segment, Agile CMS. Help me understand, or help us understand, what does that Agile piece mean when you select a new CMS in here? What are the core criteria that we need to look at?
Yeah, so Agile CMS is all about being collaborative, iterative or taking a collaborative and iterative approach to creating content and experiences on both the technical side, so the developers, as well as the practitioner side, those business users. That's what we mean by an Agile CMS. And these phases will be different for different brands. They could be, in some cases, days or weeks. In other cases, months. Some of these are going to move a little bit faster. Some of them are going to move a little bit slower, depending on what you're used to or what you want to be as a brand. Some of them could be measured probably in hours. But this is sort of just a guidepost for you as you're sort of building out a roadmap to enhance your digital experience, to drive that digital transformation going forward.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at that more.
So kind of getting into this more around Agile CMS, that's a term that Forrester coined a few years ago now. And we see it as a solution for collaboratively curating, creating, and delivering content across channels and campaigns via iterative development and deployment processes. So this idea of developers and business users or practitioners working hand in hand to get content to market faster, to get those experiences to market faster, and then also to close the loop. So to get those experiences and content to market and bring those insights back into the business so that you can begin to act on those.
That sounds like a headless CMS, right?
Well, it does sound like a headless CMS, but one of the things that I want to make an important point around is that much like this screen, and anyone who's seen my presentations before knows I like to use food analogies because I feel like they're just so accessible to everyone. So here you see a whole bunch of ice cream or gelato, depending on where you are in the world, and we think of headless as sort of a flavor or a feature of CMS. And headless CMS doesn't always equal Agile CMS. So we think of headless capabilities as just that, as capabilities or functions within a CMS. So Agile CMS could support headless, but most of the time we see brands taking advantage of headless within Agile CMS, but not always. It's not always 100% hard and fast rule. So Agile CMS gives brands that option of being able to embrace headless where they need to or when they want to, and not necessarily always, but whenever they need to. So one of the things that we see very clearly around the Agile CMS space is that headless is a function or a feature or a capability. It's not a market unto itself.
Yeah, and we kind of spoke about this before, so I set you up for this one. But I think also the term headless is so unfortunate, and we're a little too late in the whole timing of coining that term, because the beauty of it is just that it can have so many heads. So I'm totally with you there. Not every headless CMS can be an Agile CMS, but API first, is that something that you see as a trend for the Agile CMS space?
Yeah, it definitely is, because it benefits the users, it benefits the brands, the companies that are using it from both a front end and a back end architecture, in that, on the front end, it's all about being able to deliver the content and the experiences into, whatever channel the business is doing business in. On the back end, it's about basically setting up the plumbing so that information, content, data can flow from whatever system it needs to into the CMS and back out. And by embracing an API first architecture, you unlock a lot of flexibility within the CMS to both deliver those experiences on the front end and sort of that plumbing for the data and the content on the back end.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we know around Agile CMS is that it's got to support end-to-end content. And what you see building out over on the right-hand side is maybe a workflow or a review and approval process or a publishing process that you're familiar with, where different people are working on content. They want changes partway through, and then the content is finalized and pushed out, or the experience is finalized and pushed out to those endpoints. And one of the things that we know is an Agile CMS must support end-to-end content. So it's not just a static repository, but it's increasingly focused on that upstream creative workflow for content creators and experience designers. It can help moderate, or it can moderate user-generated content, which we know is so important to brand content, getting in those advocates, those evangelists for the brands, and wrapping review and approval process around that. It can handle the delivery of the content, or it can hand it off to another system that might handle the delivery. And then again, just sort of reinforcing a point that I made earlier, it's all about closing that loop and bringing those analytics back into the creative process so you can help drive some of those business insights. We know Agile CMS must deliver content to the omnichannel. So, if we take a look at the number of connected devices used by generation, we see Gen Y, using more than 4 connected devices on a daily basis. So they might be moving from, a laptop to a smart TV to a wearable to a voice assistant. So the content needs to be able to meet them in the channel that they want to be met, or the channel that they want to do business in. So it's really, really important for an Agile CMS to be able to deliver that content out to the omnichannel. We're seeing Agile CMS lean cloud native. Agile CMS, for the most part, is fully embracing cloud. Now, it may embrace different flavors of cloud, but we know that some of the top benefits of SaaS, based off of our software survey, include improved business agility. So you're better able to respond to changes in the market, or changes in the business, or changes amongst your competitors. So it's a strategic win for you to be SaaS-based. From your end, you don't have to worry about regular automated updates. You don't have to worry about managing those updates, because those are things that are all managed for you from the vendor. So it's going to lessen the load on your internal IT staff around deploying those updates. There's a speed of implementation and deployment. Years ago, we used to measure implementation and deployment in months, sometimes years. I've had conversations with clients where we're on year 2 of our CMS deployment. Now we're measuring deployment in days, maybe weeks, sometimes hours, minutes, depending on what exactly you're looking at. But the takeaway here is you've got improved speed, and that levels up to business agility and all of those things that precede it. Oh yeah.
Wait, sorry, I'm always rudely interrupting you, Nick. But
no, please do.
It's really interesting because from the Mark Alliance that Contentstack is a founding member of, we had an independent research conducted, which 100% confirms these points. But even I was shocked about the weights. So on average, 38.5% of an IT team's budget and time went on to dealing with vendor upgrades for those that were still on a monolith. 40%, that's almost half of the resources that you could push onto actually creating new customer experience improving functionality. And then the ones that were on a monolithic architecture versus a composable one, double the efficiency, effectiveness, speed of implementation and employment. They got twice as much stuff done on top of that, right? It's incredible. Because sometimes in conversations, it's like, yeah, it's going to be a little faster, but it's different worlds faster, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's these I think back to a conversation that I had with a large retailer, and they were basically talking about all of these small efficiency gains that they get across the organization. And while, 30 seconds here doesn't seem like a lot, and 5 minutes there doesn't seem like a lot, and an hour over here doesn't seem like a lot, when you start to scale that across, the number of times that process is done, across the number of people who do it, across the daily basis that needs to get done, all of a sudden, those little tiny efficiencies that have been sprinkled across the organization level up to huge, cost savings, time saving, when you level it up to the entire organization and you scale it across the entire organization. And so that's, just sort of a real world example of what we're seeing.
Yeah, love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Number 4, easier information sharing and collaboration. This is a core tenet of Agile CMS is one, the information sharing on the back end, the collaboration between people, users, creators, designers. So that being really key to a SaaS benefit, and then lower overall costs. So, the benefit here is you can better respond to the market, you can get faster, and you can do all of those things at a lower cost. So it's really the best of both worlds when you're looking at a SaaS deployment. This one I love because it's talking about the sort of smart DX or smart digital experience helper bots that can kind of come in and help you out. And this is one of the benefits of being API based or API first, is that you can bring in, whatever flavor of smart DX you want. Say you want to help understand your content better at scale. Well, we know that for high volume, low complexity tasks like understanding content or surfacing metadata, categorizing content, one bot can do the work of 3 to 4 full-time employees. So again, this idea of scale and efficiency, really, really important. And this means that those 3 to 4 full-time employees can focus on creating content or creating experiences, those high complexity, low volume tasks, rather than those rote ones that are, can quickly be pushed off to AI or smart DX. This is, again, just really aligns with that ability to speed time to market, to drive those efficiencies, all of those things that you get. And Smart DX really aligns very, very well with that mission. So how do you start? How do you get started? What can you take away from today's presentation? So if anything, I want you to sort of zero in on what we call the customer lifecycle. That's what you see over here on the right-hand side. Some of you might call it a marketing funnel, a flywheel, a loop. We call it the customer lifecycle. And my advice here is to start your content journey by aligning with your business metrics. Within each stage of the customer lifecycle, discover, explore, buy in the pre-sale phase, use, ask, and engage in the post-sale phase, there are some business metrics that you can align to. And one of the things I often ask clients is, what is your goal? What do you want to achieve? When they say, well, we want to re-platform our CMS, or we want to start doing more modular content, or we want to do, fill in the blank. Why? What's your goal? So here are just some examples that you could adopt as a business of some goals, some business metrics that you want to align around your content or your journey. So, just for example, picking some of these off, in the discover phase where think you're high funnel, you maybe want to improve dwell time and engagement in every channel through proactive personalization using dynamic profiles. One of the stages of the customer lifecycle that I love, and I love aligning content to it, is in the use and ask phase. How can you onboard your customers faster, easier, with an emotional connection? Well, it's all about, could be digital onboarding through a mobile app. It could be self-service content that allows them to solve a problem on their own or get help on their own through a scalable experience. It's really around aligning, again, that content to some of your business metrics. And here we just highlight a few of them that may be relevant to you. You can walk away and say, all right, I want to focus on this stage of the customer life cycle. Here is the goal that I'm going to try to drive, or I want to drive, and I'm going to measure against. Now, how can my digital experiences support that? So if you take away that from today, then I'll chalk that up as a success. And with that,
Actually, Nick, there is an audience question, which I'll just pull in because it so beautifully fits onto what you just said. So the question is, how do you think about building a business case for the investment in an Agile CMS? So clearly this is the starting point. You said people are going to be faster, they'll get more done, and it's going to be cheaper. Can you help us outline a business case very quickly, like 2 minutes?
Yeah. So this, first of all, your business case needs to cut across your organization. So using this customer lifecycle as kind of a map of a lot of organizations, you could very easily say that some organizations are siloed based off of where the customer lifecycle is. So marketing maybe fits in the discover phase, commerce or sales in the buy phase, your customer service and support team, maybe they're in use and ask. So first of all, it's looking across the customer lifecycle. So this means you need to bring together marketing and sales and commerce and service and support and social together to create a goal, to outline a goal. And then it's, how do you support that through the digital experiences? So one is you're bringing together this cross-functional team across the organization. You're starting to align goals across that. So, one great example is, well, how can I start to create more self-service content? How do I get how do I unlock the budget to create more self-service content? Well, maybe you need to start having a conversation with a cross-functional team in your service and support segments of your organization and say, well, if we can create more self-service content, then that's going to, lessen the load for some of the contact center. The contact center can take some of those, really sort of in the weeds conversations, or some of those really challenging use cases where self-service content doesn't fit or doesn't, isn't appropriate. So maybe there's a way to kind of unlock budget from the service and support team to help create some of that self-service content. So it all starts with bringing together everyone across this customer lifecycle, and depending on how the listeners and how the audience is structured today, it's looking across that customer lifecycle and identifying the different business units that serve that customer lifecycle. And maybe you're more advanced, and maybe some of the organizations on the phone today aren't siloed like we might see in this graphic here. But that's the first piece. The first piece is, it's not the process, it's not the technology, it's aligning the people around a common goal. And then what you'll notice is a lot of the other pieces fall into place.
What I've seen, and I've come from the legacy world of CMS, what I've observed working for an API first cloud native CMS is that actually creating a prototype project, say I'm the head of services and I got tasked to optimize the onboarding experience, yet I find it a little scary to reach out to the mobile team and the marketing team and all the other teams and get buy-in, because it may take like 2 years to get everybody on the same page. Rather than doing that, I opt into sort of a smaller tier, a lower tier offering of a cloud vendor that is in budget and in line with the mandate I was given, and I prove how much faster and how much more value this brings. And we've seen it a few times actually in Contentstack. All of a sudden, the other business units flock up behind that team, going like, how did you do that? You did that in what, 45 days? Okay, we want to play too. And that's, of course, something you couldn't do 10 years ago, where you had to pay $500,000 before you actually got a CMS that you then, what did you say, it needed to implement 2 years? So that's also the beauty of the cloud native aspect, really. Yeah, cool. Thank you. If you have follow-up questions on the business case, don't hesitate to drop them into the Q&A. We'll pick them up in the end. And also in general, in the audience, if you have questions, don't be shy. Just put them in here, because I will continue to interrupt Nick. Actually, I won't, because I'm now going to share a few more thoughts with you. So, Nick, there was a wave. That was actually an Agile CMS wave, which is coincidentally why we invited you here today as well. And thank you for sharing what you see as the critical elements of an Agile CMS. Before we look into the landscape, I just want to take a moment to share with the audience why I'm a big fan of the wave methodology. Everybody looks at the dot, right? That's kind of the graphic. That's for many people the wave. There is a report that goes with that too, that goes into the trends and into the critical aspects for you as a buyer to consider when you look for a new CMS. And it explains each vendor in a little bit more detail and gives you the Forrester perspective on opportunities and cautions to look out for. But then there is magic that unfortunately very few people look at, which is the mother of spreadsheets that has in detail every vendor, every line item criteria, much more granular than you can see in the report. It explains to you what the criteria actually means, because often it's just a label, workflow. Okay, but what does Forrester mean by workflow, and what would a vendor need to get to a certain score? So if you're a Forrester customer and if you're looking into investing into a new Agile CMS, I really encourage you to look at that spreadsheet, because you can even weigh your own criteria and make your own little personal wave, depending on what matters for your business outcomes. And then you can schedule an inquiry with Nick, who's going to tell you a lot more about it too. But there was a wave. Just recently in February released the Forrester Wave for Agile Content Management Systems Q1 2021. This was the first time Contentstack was included in the wave, and we're very proud that we were named as a strong performer. The CMS with the highest score in channel support, that criterion among all other vendors. And Nick spoke to the importance of the channel support to enable your omni-channel customer experience before. So really, if you're looking to make an investment, have a look and test those capabilities thoroughly. Contentstack also received the highest scores in the criteria of experience management, personalization, commenting and annotations, metadata taxonomy, decoupled delivery, and delivery model. So Contentstack, if I hope you can see my mouse pointer, is all the way up here. And we're going to talk about the different tiers in a second, Nick. But before we do, one of the comments you made in the report really stuck with me. You said, look to a vendor that will support your technical users with headless first tooling and the right APIs, love the right APIs, but not at the expense of your business users or practitioners. This was your recommendation for enterprise organizations that are looking to replace their CMS. Why, Nick, did you feel the need to explicitly call out, but not at the expense of business users and practitioners?
Yeah, great question. And the reason is because if you sort of look at the past two, perhaps three decades of the CMS space, you've seen this pendulum swing back and forth between developers and practitioners. And most recently with more of the headless first vendors coming into the fray, we've seen a little less emphasis on the practitioners. And the practitioners saying, where did my tools go? How do I create sites, pages, experiences, those sorts of things? And with Agile CMS, one of the things that we wanted to make sure we tried to do, and I think we succeeded at this, was focusing on capabilities that embrace both sides of the aisle, both sides. So both those developers and those practitioners. And that's the idea here around Agile CMS, is that it's a tool for all users, all channels, not just one for one segment of the business or one specific channel, but it's something that embraces all users, all channels. So that was something very, very important for us to call out.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's interesting because anecdotally, 10 years ago, IT was always the bad guy because they couldn't create the functionality fast enough for marketing. I've seen some of those those headless CMSs that you mentioned. They don't even have a differentiation between business and developers. It's like developers and non-developers, literally on their websites. We at Contentstack are very passionate about enabling the business users as well. And what we've seen when we replace other headless CMSs is that actually only when both sides are equally enabled do organizations get to that speed and agility, that adaptive, resilient model. Because if it's for developers only and the business practitioners can't work with it, the business outcomes at the end of the day are not going to change. It's just that business is then slow and not the developers anymore, which may feel funny for some developers, but doesn't help serve the business outcomes, I guess. Cool. Keep on sending in those questions, please. There is a few that we already have, and I know one of them, Nick, is the highest inquiry frequency that you have, which is, when I look at the wave, do I always want to go with the leader?
The simple answer is no. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And well, this is part of the reason why we had 15 vendors in the wave. So this is the top, I would say probably quarter or third of the CMS market. And one of the things that you'll notice in the Forrester report is every vendor gets what we call a write-up. It's about 2 paragraphs. And at the end of that write-up, we highlight, who is this vendor a good fit for? So one vendor might maybe have expertise in your specific vertical, or they might have customers who are like you, or they might be large if you're a large enterprise, or they might be small if you're sort of mid-market or maybe even SMB. And there might be, things that fit, better in one case. Some vendors might have more of a commerce focus. Some vendors might have more of a headless focus. So you need to sort of fit those vendors' capabilities and also their go-to-market and the maybe industries that they focus on with your business. So that's why it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Leaders may be right for some buyers. They might not be right for everyone, or they aren't right for everyone. So that's why we have 15 vendors in the evaluation, and each vendor is a good fit for a specific type of customer.
Mm-hmm. And a follow-up question to that, which relates to this, is can you help us understand the axis of the graphic?
Yes, definitely. So there's two axes here on the graphic. There's an up and down. So as you move up on the graphic, that means that the current offering, basically the capabilities or the features of the CMS are getting stronger. And as you move left to right on the graphic, that means the strategy of the vendor is getting stronger. So by plotting both a strategy score on left to right and a current offering score up and down, that is how the dot is positioned on the graphic. The size of the dot is about market presence. It's about customers. It's a mix of customers and revenue. So that the actual size of the dot or the bubble doesn't have anything to do with capabilities or features or strategy. It's the market presence of the vendor. And then the positioning on the graphic has everything to do with capabilities and strategy.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I hope that answered the question. How does Agile CMS, Nick, fit into the wider digital experience stack?
Yeah. So many of you are familiar with digital experience platforms or the digital experience stack. Agile CMS focuses on the content. We know that digital experience platforms or the digital experience stack, depending on which way you want to look at it, is more than just content. Content is one very important component of it, and we think that content is the soul of digital experience. But there are other things at play here, like data, like analytics, like transactions or commerce, like automation and AI, like services, that all compose different pieces of that digital experience stack. And my colleague Joe Sisman is going to be kicking off a DXP, a digital experience platform wave, where he's going to be looking at vendors who support those components like content and data and transactions. So that's something that I'm really excited to, I won't be leading that, but I'm excited to see how that all shakes out and the vendors included and how Joe takes a look at the market there. But yeah, content is one piece of digital experience, and it has to work in tandem with all of those others. It has to work in tandem with data and automation and AI and transactions and all of those other pieces that fuel a digital experience. So, yeah.
Again, where the APIs are really critical for making that work in a stack plainly. Fantastic. If there is no more questions, dear audience, last chance to ask Nick outside of the context of a Forrester inquiry. Then we're coming to the top of the hour anyway. Nick, Thank you so much for your insights today. Really enjoyed the background to the wave. Thank you for so candidly answering the audience questions on the wave itself too. Any last words, Nick?
Well, just thank you to the Contentstack team and for everyone who's taken time out of their busy day. I know it's not always easy to carve out an hour of time, but hopefully if you found this valuable, and if there are additional questions, I'm happy to answer them offline.
Fantastic. Thank you for that offer. Thank you everybody for joining. Indeed, if you have questions, do send them to information@contentstack.com. If you haven't read the Forrester Wave report yet, let us know too, and we'll send a copy over to you. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you very much again, Nick.